this week's reading from Rays of the One Light.
This is a reading from the book Rays of the One Light, Weekly Commentaries on the Bible and the Bhagavad Gita by Swami Kriyananda. Week 28, Self-Reliance versus Self-Reliance. Truth is one and eternal. Realize oneness with it in your deathless self within. The following commentary is based on the teachings of Paramhansa Yogananda. Last week, we considered the need for attunement with God, with the gurus, with the wisdom of others, until we make that wisdom our own. There is a strong and in fact valid belief nowadays in the need for standing on one's own feet rather than depending weakly on others to carry us by their strength. Swami Kriyananda was once asked, "What is the best yoga posture?" "That one," he replied, "which sets you squarely on your own 2 feet." Our strength must come from within. If that strength comes from the ego, however, instead of from soul consciousness, it is like a guitar string without its sounding board. The notes it emits will be thin and feeble. Our strength must come from within, but must be coupled with recognition of our inner link with broader and higher realities. The Bhagavad Gita says in the 10th chapter, "Everyone in this world whose life is glorious or prosperous or powerful, know that his achievement is but a little spark from the great sun of my effulgence." Jesus, in talking to his disciples, emphasized also the power of attunement with his own consciousness as a ray of the divine. For this ray had descended already through him in response to their devotion. It was a sign that God was already listening to them with receptive attention and did not require to be wooed in that way any longer. In the passage preceding the one that we read last week, Jesus said, "I am the true vine, and my Father is the husbandman. Every branch in me that beareth not fruit, he taketh away. And every branch that beareth fruit, he purgeth it, that it may bring forth more fruit. Now you are clean through the word which I have spoken unto you. Abide in me, and I in you. As the branch cannot bear fruit of itself, except and abide in the vine, no more can ye, except ye abide in me." This was the meaning of Paramhansa Yogananda's counsel also, when speaking more intimately to the disciples of the need for attunement with him. Thus, through Holy Scripture, God has spoken to mankind. Om. Om.
Good morning. Good morning, Dale. Those at home, welcome. We'll start this morning with a reading from Whispers from Eternity, Yogananda's beautiful book of prayer demands and poems. And this morning, I'm reading number 61. Teach me to store honey of good qualities from all soul flowers in the honeycomb of my heart. In the summer days of life, teach me to gather honey from the flowers of all spiritual qualities that blossom in the garden of truthful souls. I will store the perfume of forgiveness in the honeycomb of my heart, the lotus fragrance of humility, mirth-scented devotion, the rare honey of all soul qualities. And even though the snowflakes of wintry experiences and earthly separations whirl about me, I shall seek thee in the honeycomb of my heart, where often I have found thee, stealing the stored honey of my devotion. Wherever thou hast come, in every place hallowed by thy feet, I will lie, touching thy footprints. Ah, there alone will I find a place of true safety. Beautiful. Right. So yesterday, actually, I went out to check my garden after all this rain we've had, and I couldn't help but think of this week's reading. That's what makes Jesus's teaching so powerful. When Jesus came to earth during Kali Yuga, he used metaphor and parable to speak to his disciples in a way that they could understand. He uses a lot of metaphor of using your hands to work the earth, or carpentry and different things that people of that time could understand. And when I was in my garden, I noticed this beautiful wall of morning glories that sprout up uninvited every year. I don't know where they came from, but they are beautiful, as you know, but they take over the whole fence and they bloom. But the problem is their roots are very tenacious, and they go into the garden and they start to choke everything, the tomato plants, the eggplants. So because of the fence, I can't really find the root system. So I have to go and just clip them with scissors at the root. And sadly, the next day, they're just shriveled. They're gone basically within a day without that sustenance of the vine. And that's what we're talking about today. Our sustenance in life is our attunement and connection with the Christ consciousness, with our great gurus. And just like the morning glories, our beauty comes from God. And I'm talking about our inner beauty, the soul qualities that we possess. That comes from our attunement to God in any of the forms that people worship God in. And when we're not in attunement with God, with that life force, we don't shrivel and die the way the flowers did in my garden, but we become less of who we truly are. We become an ego reflection of who we are. Who we truly are is the big self. And when we stay in attunement with God, we blossom in the most beautiful way. We become a more brilliant version of ourselves that our ego consciousness can't even imagine, because the ego is so limited in its thinking, it's contractive, whereas God's love and our attunement to God makes us expansive in every way possible. I am the true vine, and my Father is the husbandman. Now, we don't use that word anymore. It's an ancient word for farmer, or for one who tills the soil, works the earth. And this is Jesus's way of saying that God is the one who sustains and nourishes us, and the one who cares for us and tills the soil of our lives and plants the seeds of peace, compassion, inner joy, love in the soil of our hearts. So God is indeed the farmer who cultivates those qualities in our life. Abide in me, and I in you. As the branch cannot bear fruit of itself, except it abide in the vine, no more can ye, except ye abide in me. And that's what happens to us, again, when we lose contact with God, when we cut off that attunement. For whatever reason, we get distracted in life, and we have different things that pull us away from that vibration of staying in attunement with the Christ consciousness or with our guru's consciousness. And it just cuts us off. You know, again, to use that metaphor of the shriveling flowers, it cuts off that brilliance that we truly are. The interesting thing is that Jesus gave this metaphor to his disciples shortly before he was crucified. And that was very intentional, because he wanted them to know, and he wanted all of us to know, that he wasn't abandoning them, that although he wouldn't be physically present, he would continue to nourish and sustain them through their direct connection with them, through their attunement, their prayer, their meditation. And the same is true with our great gurus. Even though we're not in their physical presence, they live in our hearts, and they can be truly alive within us when we keep that attunement going. You know, it's a choice we make each day. We make that choice each day if we're going to stay in that vibration of thinking of God and having God with us as a friend and partner in everything we do, or we can turn away from God. Just like, you know, the sunflowers in the garden, they turn towards the sun, but when they don't have sun, they shrivel. There's a great story of a wonderful more modern day master from the 40s, 50s, 60s, Neem Karoli Baba, who's a great Indian saint. And Pasqualina and I had the great blessing of visiting his ashram called Kanchi Dham in India. It's in the foothills of the Himalayas, and we stopped there on our way to our pilgrimage to Babaji's cave. He's a well-known guru in America because of some of his American disciples, such as Ram Das, who wrote Be Here Now, and also Krishna Das, the wonderful kirtan devotional singer that many of us like to listen to. And he was a worshiper of God in the form of Ram, and Ram was one of the incarnations of Vishnu. And he told his devotees, just repeat Ram's name over and over and over. Ram, Ram, Sita Ram, 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 Sita Ram. So he really talked about a japa practice. But he also told his disciples, meditate like Jesus. He said that all the time. But unlike Yogananda, he didn't teach a technique. He didn't teach Hang Sa or Kriya Yoga. So one day, Krishna Das asked him, how did Jesus meditate? And Baba began to open his mouth as though to speak, but instead he closed his eyes. And the world became silent as though the whole world was sleeping. And after a minute or two, 2 tears rolled down his cheeks. And when he opened his eyes, he looked at Krishna Das and he said, he lost himself in love. That's how Jesus meditated. He lost himself in love. And he said he was one with all beings and he never died. And then Neem Karoli Baba said, no one understands. He didn't die. He just lost himself in love. And Yogananda said that when we're in tune with the Christ consciousness, our whole life will change. And again, that's that blossoming of tuning into the S with the capital S, the big self of God's consciousness. Our whole life will change and blossom. And the love of God uplifts us and enlarges us in so many ways. Love is the most powerful force in the universe and the secret to attunement. So we know that love is one of the 8 aspects of God, and love is the string on the beads of everything in our life. It holds the whole universe together, the power of love. So how to love like Jesus? That's the question for us as well. And we all know how to love the people we love, don't we? It's very easy to love the people we love, but it's not as easy to love some people. And we need to purify our hearts, you know? So at this point in our spiritual life, we don't have enemies. You know, Jesus said that we should love our enemies as our friends. Well, we don't really have enemies, but we do have little areas of the heart that need purification. And Sri Yukteswar said that the most essential thing on the spiritual path is to uncover the natural love in our heart, that we can't take one step on the spiritual path without that blossoming of the natural love of the heart. And that develops spontaneously the more we attune our consciousness to one of the great masters. Sri Yukteswar also talked about 8 meannesses of the heart, and he said we had to transcend them. And there's a whole list, but today I just wanted to bring up the first one, which he said is hate. It's a meanness in the heart. Now, again, most of us don't hate anyone. At this point in our spiritual lives, to be devotees of a great master, we don't feel hate for anyone, but hate has subtler vibrations. When you go from the very, you know, it's a continuum. When you go from the very most evil, darkest part of hate all the way over here, you know, there's little things like annoyance, dislike, jealousy, irritation, right? And we can all feel that. We've all had that in our lives with different people. And these are the areas in our hearts as devotees that we really need to purify. So last week at work, I was asked to teach a workshop on well-being and stress reduction techniques for a new group of nurses. There were 20 in the room, and they had just been working for about 6 months. And they were so quiet. I didn't hear a peep out of anyone. It was really kind of strange not to get any feedback. But at one point, I was showing them how to do a seated twist at their desk. And I just spontaneously said, oh, the great thing about twisting is that twisting helps relieve irritation and anger. And they all just burst out laughing, and they started talking to each other about all the people they were irritated with on their unit. And it just became this really interesting moment. And I laughed to myself. I thought, okay, that's something everybody can relate to, you know, like you get irritated with people. So how do we purify that? Because let's be honest, we have that, right? We sometimes have it with a family member or a friend or with a coworker or with someone we meet that we don't even know sometimes. And again, that irritation or that little bit of dislike or that judgment in the heart obscures God's light. So if we really want to shine, we have to go in there and purify that. So Master gave us the peace and harmony prayer, which is really one of the most powerful things we can do. If we're having some type of inner conflict with someone, we visualize them and we repeat, Lord, we use the person's name, fill this person with peace and harmony, peace and harmony. Then we do it for ourselves at the end. If it's really bad and we can't even do that, then you just be honest with God, with Jesus and Yogananda, because they know our heart and they know our thoughts. We can't hide anything. There's no secrets. We can hide it from other people, but we can't hide it from them. And so just have an open, honest dialogue and conversation, an inner conversation, and say, I'm struggling with this. Can you please do this for me? Can you pray for this person and help me to purify this part of my life? So over time, by these little practices, we can learn to love like Jesus and learn to meditate like Jesus and stay in deeper attunement, receive more. The more we open our hearts, the more of this vibration we receive. So these little storms of the heart obscure God's effulgence. They obscure that beautiful, beautiful light. There's a story of Sri Yukteswar meeting Babaji that I've told before at Sunday service because it's one of my favorites because it really touches my heart. And I think we can really understand. Swami Sri Yukteswar was bathing one morning at the Ghat, and it was silent and beautiful and quiet. And he came out, and the only sound he could hear was of his dhoti making a little splashing sound as he walked. And he felt a very strong inspiration to turn around. And when he turned around, he saw Babaji sitting under the banyan tree with his group of disciples. And Sri Yukteswar was so excited and thrilled, as you can imagine. And he went over and he asked Babaji if he would please come to his house. And he said, oh, no, we're happy here under the trees. And he said, please stay. I'm going to run home and get you some sweetmeats, which are little delicacies. And when he came back, Babaji was gone. So Sri Yukteswar was really hurt. He was really, really upset. And in his mind, he thought to himself, well, if I see him again, I wouldn't want to talk to him anyway, which is hard to believe, right? But can we relate to that? It's amazing when you think this is Sri Yukteswar and Babaji. So a few months went by and he went to Lahiri Mahashaya's house, his guru's house, and he walked in and Lahiri said, Sri Yukteswar, did you see Babaji at my threshold? And he said, no. And then he touched him. Lahiri touched Sri Yukteswar on the forehead, and all of a sudden his vision opened and he saw Babaji standing in the sunlight. And he didn't prostrate to him. He didn't pranam. And Lahiri looked at him in astonishment. And then Babaji said to Sri Yukteswar, what exactly did he say? He said, oh, I hurt your feelings, didn't I? And then Sri Yukteswar, he softened up, but Babaji basically said to him, you were so full of excitement that day that you extinguished us into the ether because of your restless excitement. And then he told him that you must meditate more, that your gaze is not yet faultless. You could not see me hiding behind the sunlight. But it's such a powerful story because this is a self-realized master who had his feelings hurt by another, great avatar. And it just goes to show you that even when you're all the way at the end, close to self-realization, these little storms of the heart can pull you down and the ego can just take you. And we have to remember that God comes in a still and silent, purified heart. So still and silent and purified heart, that's when God comes to us. And our strength and our inner attunement to God, it takes, again, I'm talking about the little self, it just expands our awareness. The little self is like this. It's like this clenched tight little fist. It's constrictive and it holds tension and it's limited. But the big self, the attunement to God, is like this. It's like an open palm. It's expansive. It's receptive. It's spacious. And we want to stay in that vibration. We want our hearts to be open. We want ourselves to be open. This little story of Sri Yukteswar, he was in that closed fist moment. So it's something for us to remember, like when we're having those feelings, Just think of that closed fist. And it's so interesting because we know Yogananda ji gave us the energization exercises. And he said if there was only one technique to take on a desert island, it would be the energization exercises, because from that technique, all the others would be revealed. And I never really understood that in the beginning. I found that mind-boggling. And I thought, why not Hong Sa, right? But as the years go by and you do them, you start to realize that in addition to energizing the body and feeling the cosmic current moving, it's also a metaphor for the little ego, that tightness. And when we release and relax and let go, that's when God comes. God comes in surrender. God comes in breathlessness. So the next time you're doing your energization exercises, just remember that. And you can see eventually that from that surrender, how the other techniques would come in. You have that pause between the breath, you have that moment of silence, and you feel God's vibration. So it makes sense, over time when you do them. So purification of the heart is at the root of all of our spiritual pursuits. Every branch in me that beareth not fruit, he taketh away, and every branch that bears fruit, he purgeth it, that it may bring forth more fruit. And we can interpret the branches which do not bear fruit as our little ego qualities. And by God's grace, he'll take those away from us and make room through purification, for new fruit, the fruit of the spiritual qualities of love and compassion and goodwill to all. So when we call God into our life, he comes and he does purge and remove all the things that don't serve us. Sometimes it's against our will, and sometimes it's not comfortable. But when we ask God for that purification, he will help us to remove all the things that are standing in our way. And sometimes at the time, it feels sad, like a loss, like you can't understand it. But then in hindsight down the road, you realize that that thing was standing in your way of having a deeper experience or deeper attunement to God. So in the Bhagavad Gita, the 10th chapter today, everyone in this world whose life is glorious or prosperous or powerful, know that his achievement is but a little spark from the great sun of my effulgence. And in the Indian scriptures, God light is described as brighter than 100,000 suns. And we carry that within us. We carry that little flame within our hearts. And our only job here is to illuminate and expand the effulgence of God's love within us. And lucky for us, we've been given this amazing teaching where the root of our practice is a purification practice. Our meditation, our kriyas are a way to purify the heart and to allow God's light and love to come in, and to teach us to meditate like Jesus, and to teach us to love like Jesus.